Have you seen Eye Origins? It's a 2014 mystery romance about a molecular biologist who uncovers evidence about the eye which may fundamentally change our perspective on life as we know it. The film begins with close-ups of various eyes. We see Dr. Ian Gray, a scientist that has been interested in the human eye since he was a child, taking as many pictures of them as he can. Ian then asks the audience to remember all these details of the eyes that changed his world. Ian takes us back to 8 years ago in New York when he was a PhD student at a Halloween party. He wanders out onto a balcony for a smoke and meets a girl who is watching the moon. He asks her if he can take a picture of her eyes, which she agrees to. She asks him if he knows about the story of the Phasianid, a bird that experiences all of time in one instance, and when it meets the love of its life, it is both happy and sad. As she sees for him, it is the beginning, but she knows it is already over. She then pushes Ian into a bathroom where they start to have sex. Ian stops her and asks if she will regret it in the morning. He sees a tear run down her face before she suddenly rushes out. Ian pulls his pants up and tries to chase after her, but the taxi she gets into pulls away. Ian goes to work the next day, where his lab partner Kenny informs him that he has a new first-year rotating student waiting for him. She introduces herself as Karen. Ian explains that they are trying to make a colorblind mice see color. They are both surprised when the mouse passes the test. After Ian explains his experiment in more detail, Karen suggests they look for the origin of the eye, a non-seeing organism with the PAX6 gene which built the eye from scratch. Back at their apartment, Ian asks Kenny about the girls in the S&M outfits at the party. Ian comments on the girls' amazing eyes with central heterochromia and how he felt this girl filled a hole inside of him, and now he feels vacant. Kenny laughs at him. The next day, Ian buys a lottery ticket and has a surreal experience where the numbers around him seem to match up to 11. He takes a bus 11 and he ends up in front of a billboard with the same central heterochromia eyes belonging to the girl at the party. He immediately searches the internet for the model and finds her blog. Ian hangs out at a cafe where the girl is a regular in hopes of bumping into her. Back at the lab, Karen is searching for the PAX6 gene in 462,000 organisms. Sometime later, while on the metro, Ian sees the girl from the party on the same train. He goes and sits down next to her, and she gives him mementos. She gets up to get off the train, and he places his headphones on her ears and follows her on the platform. She eventually turns around and kisses him. They get to know each other at a cafe, and he finds out her name is Sophie, from Argentina. He asks her why she tried to have sex with him that night. She replies that she was lonely for a while, and that night she felt like they knew each other for a long time, like they were connected in past lives. He says he's a scientist and only believes in data. He explains that his experiment on the eyes is to disprove that it was created by an intelligent designer to end the debate on God. The couple start a passionate relationship. While at work, Ian and Karen continue the experiment. Ian is cynical, but tells Sophie about the unlikely amount of 11s which led him to her. Sophie, on the other hand, is very spiritual and tells Ian that he is scared of the light coming through from the other side. She then asks him to move in with her. The next day, he does. At her apartment, Sophie shows Ian some pictures of her family. She then shows him proof of the spirit world, a picture of a statue in St. Anne's Cathedral, where eyes appeared as the picture was taken. Ian dismisses this claim with a kiss and continues unpacking. Later on in bed, Ian tells Sophie that he loves her smell. She asks Ian to cremate her when she dies. Ian refuses, as that means total obliteration, and he wants to clone her if it's possible in the future. The couple decide to get married, but are informed that they must wait 24 hours to be sure. Ian then notices that Karen has called him 5 times and calls her back. Karen reveals that she has found the PAX6 gene in a strange worm. Ian is ecstatic and asks Sophie to come with him to the lab. She isn't too happy about it, as it's kind of their wedding day. Ian asks if she wants to put on their rings, but Sophie replies it is bad luck. Ian says he doesn't believe in luck, but he does believe they have known each other forever, as they were together as atoms since the Big Bang. At the lab, he introduces Karen to Sophie. Karen notices Sophie isn't too happy and decides to leave the couple alone. Ian confronts Sophie, to which she says he is torturing worms and think it is dangerous to play God. Ian explains that they are not torturing worms, they are helping these worms to see, and that he doesn't believe in God. Sophie says that's just like the worms. Humans can evolve to see this other world, and that she is not the only one. She starts to kiss him, but Ian ends up knocking over some formaldehyde and getting it in his eyes. They call Karen back and bandage up his eyes. The couple head back home. The elevator they ride on starts to creak and gets stuck. They wait for a while, but then the lift suddenly drops a little, scaring them both. Ian decides to take off his bandage and climb out. He helps Sophie out just as the lift drops further. They giggle a little, but with his injured eyes he can't see clearly. After noticing that Sophie is unresponsive, Ian screams in horror as he realizes the elevator has cut Sophie in half. Ian spreads Sophie's ashes at the statue, but is traumatized and goes into a state of depression, stealing drugs from the lab. Karen updates Ian with his progress of the experiment and brings him some food. He cries on her shoulder, and they end up kissing. 7 years later, Ian is on TV promoting his new book, The Complete Eye. Karen is pregnant with his baby. Later at a restaurant, Ian comments on the waitress's perfume, to which she informs him it is Tresor. Kenny jokes that he is hitting on the waitress in front of his pregnant wife. Karen comments that she lacks the gene for jealousy. After relaxing at home, Ian heads out to a convenience store to buy some ice cream, but also picks up a bottle of Tresor. Back at home, he opens the perfume, starts to look at the photos and videos of Sophie, and starts to masturbate. Karen walks in and asks him not to stop, but is shocked when she sees what he is looking at. He explains that he never does this. She replies that sometimes she thinks about how, if he hadn't called him into the lab, Sophie would still be alive. Ian replies that he feels like a monster because that day in the elevator, he thought that he would be stuck with this child for the rest of his life, and the next moment, she was dead. They kiss and make up. After some time, the couple's baby Tobias is born, and the nurse asks the couple if they will allow the baby's eyes to be scanned for the hospital's records. However, after doing so, a man by the name of Paul Edgar Derry appears on the screen. The nurse explains that the system is new and reboots it. A few days later, Ian receives a call from Dr. Simons from Yale, asking if they could run a few basic tests, as there may be a possibility of early autism. At Dr. Simons' lab, they display some pictures of places, animals and people, to Tobias and track what he responds to. Tobias starts to cry, and the test ends. Back at home, the couple are suspicious of Dr. Simons' test and search for one of the places shown in the pictures, a diner in Idaho. Ian travels to the diner and asks the waitress if there's anything interesting to see. She gives him directions to the dairy farm. Ian drives over to the farm and strikes up a conversation with the lady herding her cows. He asks if they are milking cows. She replies they are meat cows, and her name is Julia Derry. He asks if she is related to Paul Edgar Derry. She informs him that Paul is her father. Ian then sees a dog and an older lady, who were in the pictures from Dr. Simon's test. Back at home, Karen breaks down the connections between Tobias and Paul Edgar Derry. They have the same iris patterns. There is some connection between them from Dr. Simon's test, and Paul died 10 months before Tobias was conceived. Kenny interrupts them, calling them crazy and asking what these connections referencing. He tells them that Dr. Simons is one of the 5 people who have access to the Iris Biometrics database, which his company owns. They then try to find other matches from the people who have died from Ian's Iris picture collection. They find no matches until Karen suggests Sophie. Her record on the system shows that she was scanned in Delhi, India. Ian says she's probably traveled there, but Kenny adds 3 months ago. Later that night, Karen encourages Ian to go to India, but he is reluctant. Karen suggests maybe the eye does have some connection to the soul, to which Ian reacts skeptically. Karen pushes further until Ian replies he can't go back to that part of his life. Karen tells Ian that this is bigger than both of them, bigger than Sophie. He calls her fucking stubborn and goes to Dolly. He meets a man of God named Daryl in the hotel elevator and then heads to his room. The next day, Ian visits the Children's Community Center where the iris record was scanned. He meets Priya Varma, a manager there, and tells her he has a strange request. He explains he's looking for someone, but only has a picture of their eyes. Priya says she knows her, asks if she is in trouble. Ian says no, that she is very special. Priya tells him that the girl's name is Salamina, but she hasn't seen her for a few months. Ian promises to donate to the community center and asks if Priya can help him find Salamina. She agrees to meet him at noon the next day. Priya takes Ian down a busy street and asks around. They discover that both Salamina's parents are dead and she is living on the streets. Ian relays the news back to Karen and adds there are 1 million people living in the 10-block radius, making it virtually impossible to find her. Ian decides to put up a billboard advertisement, offering cash reward for finding someone with Salamina's eyes. He immediately gets numerous phone calls, but the people are too old to be Salamina. After some time, Priya and Ian have tea together. She asks him if he is religious. He explains that religion is based on scripture that cannot be challenged, where science is ever improving. Priya asks him what he would do if something spiritual disproved his scientific beliefs. Later on, Karen calls Ian, asking him to come home, as it has been weeks. But just at that moment, he noticed a girl staring at his billboard. He slowly approaches the girl and sees she has the eyes. Ian calls Priya and asks her to meet them at the hotel. Ian takes some pictures of Salamina's eyes and then calls Karen to do some tests. Salamina picks correctly the first few pictures related to Sophie, but when she gets some pictures wrong, she gets discouraged and picks some incorrectly. The final set of pictures she picks, a picture of herself. Karen reveals the results as 44% correct, just a touch above random. She asks Ian how he feels, and he replies, "Kinda foolish." After hanging up with Karen, Salamina is worried she did badly in the test. Ian reassures her that it's just a stupid test. He then leads Salamina down the hallway, and they wait for the elevator. When the elevator door opens, Salamina cries in fear and holds on tightly to Ian. He stares into her eyes in awe. They embrace each other and cry. Ian carries Salamina down the stairs, through the doors, and into the light.
See.
Now you've seen it, please like and subscribe. And remember, kids, if you're in your room and you want some happy time, make sure you lock the doors.